What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with him of the Almighty Sermon. Thank you for being here. It is great to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. And it's nice to be called the Mighty Seven. I kind of want it as a badge, I think.
There you go. Patent it before it's taken by someone else, right?
Maybe I can sell it as merch, actually.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. We'll talk after the interview about this. We might be
We'll
onto
talk.
something.
We can split the cost and the profits.
Maybe. We'll see. We'll see. But it is so awesome to have you here because your new album of Golden Verse is absolutely beautiful. For people who haven't heard the full album yet, though, do you feel that the first single that you released, Golden, is a good representation of what this whole album will sound like, or is that just scratching the surface of what's to come?
I think, actually, I do. I think that's probably. It's kind of got everything that I would like a sermon song to be so far. Um, it's 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 kind of slow and swelling, but it's a constant crescendo essentially, with a kind of chorus to keep you hooked in. So I think, yeah, I'd say it's a pretty good representation of all the bits and pieces that make up the new album.
Do you feel that this is more or less sort of like a continuation off of Birth of the Marvelous, or is this meant to be sort of like a new beginning for Sermon in a way?
I would say musically, it's a bit of a continuation. It's not a sidestep, but it's probably one step, if you know what I mean. And I'm comfortable with that. I wanted to. I suppose it's refining what was there. But then I think, I'm very scared of repeating myself, so I hope I haven't done that uh, too much. It's certainly more aggressive than the last one.
Was that maybe like a preconceived vision? Did you go into the studio or into the songwriting knowing let's make something more aggressive or let's sort of make something sound like this? Or was the songwriting for this very organic, improvisational, and rather experimental?
I think I've said this in another interview, but songwriting is a really annoying companion. And because of that, I think it's an extension of what you feel that you probably can't get across in your everyday life. So the first album was fairly grief laden. This one was a bit angrier, and I think it's because I felt a bit angrier with the way my life was kind of going and the things that were happening in the world. And it tends to be a reflection of that, which I've noticed. So I'm not sure what's going to happen on the new one. I can't imagine we'll ever do a happy song. So let's hope I don't have a happy life.
Well, I mean, the cruelest duality in the world is that when we are at our worst, art tends to be at its best, right?
I think that's quite over history. If anything's taught us that, I would say that's pretty true.
And you mentioned that songwriting is an annoying companion, which I think is a beautiful quote. Going back to the patenting, you should patent that quote immediately. But because a lot of people resort to not just songwriting but art altogether, whether it be painting or filmmaking or any form of self-expression as a means of escapism and a means of catharsis in a way. But for you, has the songwriting been more deteriorating rather than it's been cathartic?
It doesn't. It doesn't hurt me. Do you know what? Actually, it's for every bad. It could be emotion's quite a trapping thing because it's very difficult to know who you can talk to about it and where to even talk about it. Songwriting actually tends to you make that negative thing into a positive thing. And it's taken me years to do this, and it's actually really worthwhile doing, just from like almost like a therapeutic kind of way. I guess that kind of sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it is true. It's really true to make something that makes you feel bad into something good. And this is a very good outlet for it.
Of course. And one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite books is just because it's a cliche doesn't mean it isn't true. So,
Yeah, or if anything, it's the opposite, isn't it?
of
And
course.
I think I think I think cliches aren't such a bad thing. It's really just my time to experience that cliche, I think.
I
Well,
think
I didn't, before I terminated, hadn't experienced that at all. So I suppose it's relevant to me now.
Yeah, of course. I think the most cliche thing in the world is just the concept of fighting against becoming a cliche.
Yes. Yeah, it's that old punk methodology, isn't it? Where in the end, you just become the cliche.
Exactly. Exactly. I and even though like, Birth of the Marvelous was more grief oriented and, of Golden Verse is more anger oriented, I got many different vibes from many different sermon songs. When you go from The Descent off of Birth of the Marvelous and you play a song like The Drift, or you play a song like Rise of the sorry for the
Desiderata.
Desiderata.
Yeah,
Forgive
no,
my
no. Yeah.
mispronunciation, but I almost said Rise
Yeah.
of the Descent. But do you? Is it almost fair to say that every song is almost reflective of a specific emotion or a specific span of time in a way, or does every song more or less, are they connected with each other where they all reflect a similar emotion and a similar form of pain?
I would say that I tend to write music sequentially. So the first song is the first song, the second song is the second song written, and the third, and so on. And that, so it doesn't, I find that the album has a broad feeling, even if there's like different levels of that emotion in there. Maybe it verges onto anger, maybe it verges onto sadness. Um, I find that I never start out being like, right, I need a sad song. What I need is a song that makes sense relative to the song previous to it. I'm not sure I've nailed it on the head, um, but I do try and make sure that like if on the new album the last song is the heaviest and fastest we've ever done, and it works there only. It would not work as track three because it's the I guess the build. It's the most intense song for the most intense moment, the last kind of curtain call. Um, so I really try and think hard about it that way, but it doesn't really match my emotion. The emotion's much more broad. It's broad for the album, it's sort of like copy and pasting the feeling into every song in a way, even if the theme is different.
Well, sometimes you're working on a song though for days or weeks or months. So do you find that like maybe the longer you work on something, the harder it is to sort of maintain the emotion that initially sparked the idea?
Definitely. And but I it's a frustrating process because basically what happens is if you spend too long on something, I think it's much more fruitful to basically be done with it and be a bit more carefree and say like, right, that's it, it's done now, rather than agonize over it and say, well, it's not perfect yet, so I'm not going to release it yet. The problem is you end up standing too close to the elephant, and all you can see is just grey wrinkles. You can't sort of stand back away from it and see that it's actually, in fact, an elephant because you're striving for perfection. You really have to check in on yourself to make sure that that doesn't happen. Otherwise, you'll never move on it.
Of course, of course. Sometimes like people say before you create art, you need to feel, and that's you should. But like, how long could you be feeling something before that's all you are doing is feeling? Feeling is not creating at the end.
For sure, and I think it's I use my almost my body to feel where the song needs to go rather than my brain because I don't know how to write music. I don't really, I'm not a great musician, frankly. I do enough to get by. Um, and I can, it really is persistence more than it is talent, I would say. Um, but I know how to get, well, I think I know how a song needs to go. I'm quite sure of the direction I'm going with it, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but I don't sell yourself short. You make music that really does make the hair stand up and is very goosebump inducing. I think in the end, the feeling that you channel into your music is expressed on the other end just as well as you channel when you're into it.
I agree. I think I do a fairly good job of convincing, um, the end result. But for example, if I'm in a room with James, the drummer, um, he is an extraordinary musician. And he thinks about music in a much more different way than I do. So relatively, I'm more or less. I mean, it's a very different skill set. Like he's very good at taking an idea and building on it and making it actually good. Whereas I'm kind of much more. I like starting from nothing. I like not having a rule set and then creating something that way. I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I think there's two types of musicians in that sense. Like some people just love to play music. I like to make it more than I like to play it. But because I don't really sit there learning songs on guitar. I think I sit there thinking about what song am I going to make next in a way.
Yeah, well, songwriting is a completely separate skill than being able to play an instrument. I know people who could play, Eric Clapton or Jeff Beck to the album, like note for note, and completely shred on it,
Yeah.
but they can't write a song, whether it will be a hit song or a obscure avant-garde metal song. They just can't. They just don't get that sort of spark. So I think in the end, there's different skills that go into just music itself.
Completely, yeah.
In order to get that inspiration, though, the emotion or the drive to create, do you almost seek it out? Do you look for the inspiration, or does it just strike out of the blue for you?
A little bit of both, I would say, because I'm sometimes. I guess this is what I mean by it being a companion. It never leaves you. So there's a part of my brain that's always. It's like sorry to bring another analogy out, but it's like how a whale eats plankton and it's just constantly going around with its mouth open. That's kind of how it is for me. I'm always listening to things, I'm always reading things, and because of that, it just goes into me, and then there's a part of my brain that then uses it and spits it back out again. I would say it's much more like that. So it's sort of both conscious and unconscious, I would say.
Yeah. Does it resonate with you differently depending if it started from a more subconscious or a more conscious source of inspiration?
I think the unconscious bit is the starting point in a way. So that's like the starting point for the song. But then you'll have to like you'll have to bring in that active part of your brain to solve the puzzle you've started. And I don't think you can't keep a constant stream of anger, I don't think, if you're making an angry song. But it can start that way, and then you're like, right, now I'm going to package this into the framework of a song, and the work is going to be built around trying to actually make it something tangible that can be sort of played back and listened to.
Yeah. I've always said that when emotions, negative or positive, are the source of inspiration, sometimes the artist could become victims of their own product, and sometimes they could be so wrapped up in it that it just becomes chaos rather than sometimes you need to step back and observe your own emotion rather than just feeling that emotion all the time.
You have to find a pragmatic way of getting it out. But some people write songs not based on that at all. I'd say some people do it because it's sometimes like a technical exercise. They're like, right, I want to try this time signature with this specific riff, and I want to do that because I want to get to this solo, so I can do a solo in like 17/4 or something like that. I'm not particularly that kind of player. I It's more emotion driven, but it's also kind of just more instinct driven. It's more of it's just something I do. Like it's a real. Sometimes you get tired, but it's just always there. It's always been there ever since I picked up a guitar. It's just always been something I've made. There must be albums of songs sat there on hard drives since I was like 13 years old, because it's like a yearning. It never stops, never stops.
Absolutely. And even when you think you have an artistic block, it's not an artistic block. It's just a step in your artistic journey.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's agonizing, but it's a necessary part of the process too.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of need it because otherwise, you need to live in order to create. And sometimes when you're creating, you're not really living life out. So you're more in your own world than in the real world.
I always wonder that with I always wonder that with, say, like celebrities or people who have really hit the big time. How do you be contextually relevant to the rest of humanity? Like, how do you, let's
Simple.
say someone like Nick Cave,
Simple.
for example, who has that,
Oh,
sorry, say again.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say it's simple. They talk politics. That's how they all stay relevant.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a very good point because they might talk politics, but how much can they relate to someone who is outside of their financial and social means?
They can't.
Why should they
They
be a
can't.
spokesperson? They can't, but they will be that, which is maybe it's irresponsible, or maybe they just feel that it's what they used to feel, or maybe it's a kind of strange empathy, or I don't know.
I think it's because
It's a very philosophical conversation.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. It's just, well, it's funny. I think the reason why is they try to claim to relate to and I don't like the term regular people, but for lack of better words, like, you know, because in the end, it is the regular people consuming their art, and it is the regular people who give them a career, and it is the regular people who, in the end, keep them relevant. So maybe in the end, they feel like
Yeah.
maybe I've always thought that maybe there's a guilty conscience of them trying to give back, but in the end, they're giving back what people don't initially want to begin with.
Yes, I would agree. It's almost a little bit like champagne socialism, is what we call. Not that I'm against socialism, but there's basically it's like a political class of person saying that feed the poor, house the people, give everyone jobs and stuff, but they're there sipping champagne in their mansions, and they're kind of out of touch with the situation because of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I'm sure every interview and every journalist asked you about the mask and, the visual aesthetic of Sermon. I have to, but
Yeah. Oh,
let's hope we keep it interesting. First was this always a vision that Sermon that you had from the formation of Sermon, or did this kind of just happen as you were writing more songs for Sermon and you like this vision sort of developed over time?
I feel I don't have a huge amount of self-esteem, honestly, and certainly not to have self-esteem to perform. So it's very practically helpful in that way because it's actually like armor in a strange way. It really helps stage anxiety, even though we've only played once, but it really helped. And I looked like a gimp, like it was the wrong mask. Everything didn't turn up on time, so I had to, and now I just look like a gimp on stage. So in that sense, it's really helpful because it just makes up for my lack of confidence.
Yeah.
The second thing it does is that it distances my actual real life, which I need to somewhat rely on my name doing something else. So it's helpful there. And it's also, I think, I like the idea of designing the look to the sound because I don't really look the way the music sounds. Like none of my friends really know what metal really is. I just, and the fact that I do this was a shock to them, and they've known me for years. So it's a nice double life. But I think people will either hate it or really like it. I can understand from both sides because they just think it's a cheap gimmick. But then some people, it helps them imagine it takes them to like another world with the sound.
Yeah. I think in the end, like, sure, people are gonna be like, oh, like, and this is just the reality. People are gonna be like, oh, is this? So I saw one comment, and I think that they were just trying to be funny. That says, oh, it's Corey Taylor's long lost forgotten cousin, or something like that. I
I didn't. I want to see that.
I thought it was Imperial Triumphant and Slipknot's Child. That was my take on it. But
Yeah, I suppose it is, isn't it? Yeah, I can understand all of it, to be honest, and I think we will always get, you'd always get lumped in with, oh, another masked band. But is it really so different to the ten a penny black metal bands who all wear corpse paint?
no,
I don't know.
not at all.
Maybe it's just that there's less like masked bands, and maybe it's just a bit more annoying to just be like, oh, not another one.
Yeah.
But it's helpful for me, so it's going to carry on.
Of course, and the whole black metal thing to me, like there's been like it's not real black metal unless you wear corpse paint. I'm like, okay, black metal is all about evil and death and just sheer destruction. Nothing is scarier than looking at an actual human in the eye playing this music.
True. Although I have to say, I don't think I've ever been more scared at a gig than when I saw Gorgoroth when I was about 14 or 15.
Well, they're one of the OGs.
Gal, terrifying. Like way scarier than say like Immortal or something where it's kind of like watching a cartoon. There's an intensity to Gorgoroth where you can really feel they believe in everything they do, and it's terrifying. And all the fans, it reflects that as well, I think.
Of course, I think that there's certain like Abbott is comical, and I love it because of that. I think Abbott is very very unique. But then you have a band, my favorite black metal band, Life Lover. They don't wear corpse paint at all, but the shit that they've done on stage and off stage.
What do they do on stage?
They did everything. Some of their records are them like pretty much overdosing in the recording on purpose.
That's pretty extreme. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
It's definitely committing to the cause.
You could say that again.
Yeah. I'm not sure I would ever take something like that, but I think I'm more interested in, we don't play live, and it's a long way away, but I'd be more interested in showing, basically making people forget that they're actually watching a gig. I think that would be, and just take them into like, just to be a bit more lost in the visuals. Have you ever heard of Woodkid?
I've heard of them, but I haven't listened to them or know much about them.
Their live show, basically, it's like a new age orchestra with some stunning visuals behind it, but you just get completely lost in it because you've never seen anything quite like it, and it's just a blaze of white light. It's honestly, it's like transcending upwards. It's really something. So that, I think that kind of thing, the visual side of things is quite important. Some people see it as a gimmick. I agree. It is completely. It really does help, and I think it's a useful tool in a way, because I don't think people would see the music in the same way if I didn't do this.
Of course. And do you feel that maybe within the music, that you almost in a way portray a character? Because in the end, you say that a lot of this music is emotion that you are feeling,
Yeah.
in your personal life. So is this almost kind of like, in a way, maybe another way of an escapism, if you will, and that you are kind of portraying somebody outside of yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. I think it's. I mean, like for example, I could have had like a little voice box or something to hide my voice. I could have pretended to be more aloof and mysterious than I actually am. But I think that's a bit too difficult. It's too hard to keep up. But I would say that I would say that everything that I'm wearing and it mirrors the sound for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's an angry looking thing that's been quite damaged.
Yeah.
And it's quite regal. And I think, yeah, you said Imperial Triumphant, right? And, yeah, I can see that as well. don't think it will stay the same for every single album, though. I think it will change each time.
That would be very exciting because I think every album is a reflection or a timestamp, so maybe have a different visual to go along with each representation of your life.
And I can imagine, well, yes, and I think even I think live it would be quite cool as well because you could play. There could basically be like a rack of different faces, and then potentially you could just change the face for whatever era of music you're playing. And I think that's quite a nice. That
That's
could be quite a nice look and feel to it.
that's a really good idea. We got some ideas coming in this interview. I love it. Um,
Yeah, we're making business today.
Damn right. Before you know it, I'll be a member of the band. um,
And there's a spot open.
and I have two more questions for you. But I've always said that art in itself is life. And when you bring it into the world, it grows, it could develop, sometimes it could eventually die. Do you feel that when you finish a song, that do you want every song to be representative of a moment of a specific moment, like who you were at this particular time? Do you want your first album to be staying in 2019 and this album staying in 2023, or do you think that the art can evolve over time as you evolve?
I would say I the way I like to like once it's done, forget that it almost ever happened and move on to the next thing. Maybe it's just like washing the slate clean. Um, in terms of what people, I guess it lives on in a different way over time. I always remember seeing a quote. I think it was maybe from Misan about Emperor, and he said, when in the Night Side of the Eclipse came out, or After the Tyrant, or even Anthems, I think he said no one cared. And he said it didn't do great, but then he said, 10 years on, it the around the world is just it's just grown and grown, and then another 10 years after that, they're they're headlining all the festivals around the world, and it takes on a different life. And I think a lot of this stuff is like it takes quite some time to mature. The sound matures over time because things, I guess, every piece of music is kind of time stamped in the era that it's in, because we all sort of fish from the same river in terms of inspiration and stuff. But as it moves on, it's kind of left behind in the other era. So another generation is going to hear it and it's going to sound completely different to them. Whereas I think at the time, let's say with Emperor, there were quite a lot of bands doing kind of symphonic black metal. So maybe it was hard for them to cut through the noise, and all they needed was time for people to be like, "This is special." I think it was. I find it hard to believe that not everyone thought it was special at the time, but that's how he said he felt. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to us, but I like the idea of us leaving it behind, and then it kind of matures over time. And because actually, I would say I hate that this album has sat here for like nearly 2 years. It now feels old-fashioned to me, but maybe I'll feel different in another 8 years. I don't know.
I mean, in the end, one of my favorite quotes I learned in art history was when they were discussing about how nobody appreciated Van Gogh's work until after he died. His art never changed. It's that people changed. So I think in the end, people change, and that therefore your art will be digested differently.
I think there's a big value attached to things with. It doesn't quite have to be death. It could be other things. It could be life-changing things, life-threatening things. I think could help, basically add value to the art itself in a way. I know. I mean, did you ever? I mean, I don't mean to cheapen art history for you, but have you ever seen that Doctor Who episode where he takes Van Gogh or Van Gogh, however you want to say it, to see his own exhibition in London hundreds of years later? but there's a really nice moment where he starts crying because no one cared about what he did when he was alive. And I like the idea of that. It's just a shame that it takes death for people to do it and care.
I mean, I never seen that episode. I've never seen Doctor Who, but the thing is that it's true. I mean, look, there's times where people don't appreciate the work that much. I'm not going to mention which artists in this regard, but like, there are plenty of people who cared a lot more about artists after they passed away, uh, than before they passed away. Let's be real. Like, I mean, some artists were big at a period of time, then they kind of fell off a little bit in terms of their relevance. Then they pass away, and then their record numbers skyrocket. So,
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely true. It's just a sad fact of life that they didn't get to experience how much everyone really could have cared.
it's unfortunate, but it's just one of the cruel aspects of life. I think in the end, it's one of the. It's happened so much. Maybe I personally have grown numb to it, studying art and watching certain things happen. But I think in the end, it's just a sad reality. Make yourself heard. Make people hear your roar before they hear your final breath.
I think it's really difficult. I have to say, I it's very difficult to get people to care. You can do, I guess, you can use cheap tricks like trying to get headlines. I could, like, for example, if I was to say in all the interviews that Corey Taylor is a dick, then I'm sure at some point someone's going to be like, Sermon hates Corey Taylor,
Yeah, of
which
course.
I don't. I love. Um, but you could use a tactic like that,
Of course, it's cheap.
manipulate
It's cheap, but it
your
works.
outlet. Easier than death.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for such an awesome, awesome interview. And most importantly, thank you for your awesome new album of Golden Verse. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote for the release of this album? And what else we could be expecting for Serban in the near future?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on this. It's really nice to. It is actually genuinely a pleasure to talk to people about this stuff because it only lives with me otherwise, and that kind of hurts in a strange way. It's really frustrating. So thank you.
Of course.
In terms of the future, we'll have to see how it goes. I've got some plans in my head for the next release. I don't quite know what it's going to be yet. I think I want to take a bit more time to do an album. But I think I've got some other like songs maybe boiling away, and I don't particularly like to do singles, but there's a value to it in the sense of, well, this is a different kind of song, so maybe it's worth separating it from the normal sermon universe. I'm not sure yet, but it's all very loose. I don't know what's going to happen, but yeah, that's as certain as this future's really got. So.
So looking forward to whatever comes next. Thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Sermon of Golden Verse. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We will see you next time.
Thanks, Alex.